Did you know that one of our most innate needs as human beings is the need to fit in, to belong, to actually have social relationships? I want to welcome you to Leap Training and Coaching's weekly webinar series, where today we're going to be actually talking about the importance of social relationships while working from home. So, to introduce myself, my name is Ryan Boda. I'm one of the founders and lead partners here at Leap Training and Coaching. We're a professional development organization that's really focused on one key mission: to develop a company's greatest asset, their people. And so that's why we have this weekly webinar series. Our whole goal is to bring as much value to others as possible. Now, you may be asking yourselves, if you're looking at this as a recording, why are we talking about the importance of social relationships while working from home? Well, it's actually going to be a lot about social relationships, but we're going to focus on home because right now, while this is being recorded, we're in the COVID-19 pandemic. That's why I do have to apologize for my lighting, my space and things, because I'm not in the norm. And a lot of us are working from home. And so what we have to understand is, why social relationships? What's the importance and what does it do? So first and foremost, we're social beings. As humans, we really do have an innate need to belong and to fit in. And so I want to show you this because we know this from Maslow's hierarchy. And this is something that we've probably all heard at one point or another, is the simple Maslow's hierarchy, right? And the third one there, love and belonging. That is one of our most innate needs as human beings, is the need to fit in and to belong in friendships, in family, in our coworkers, in our workplaces. And so right now, with everything going on, we're having a very hard time really living through this experience here. So when we have that innate need, what is going on? Well, we've lost a lot of our social relationships. When we move home, when we lose the workplace we go to, our supervisors, our peers, our coworkers, we just lost all those relationships. And no, they're not gone forever. No, we aren't losing them to something else. No, but we lose the relationship of seeing somebody every day, speaking, interacting, sharing energy together. And so I want you to think about even your children. What lost relationships do they have? They've lost their relationship with their teacher. Even if they're allowed to be virtual, it's not the same experience as being there all day long. They've lost some of the relationship with their fellow students, the other people they see at school, their specials teachers. So think about the relationships that we've lost as we transition to working from home. So those are the social needs that we have that we are not fulfilling. Now, when we get to working from home, what we actually do is we do build deeper social relationships, oftentimes within our families. We start to be able to do things together that we usually haven't. But I want you to think about, as you transition back to work, think about the next lost relationship. The loss of the closeness with your children, with your spouse, with your family, with your loved ones. And how will that affect you throughout the process? Now, one last thing to really help sink in, why are social relationships so important to us? And if you've ever read a book called Outliers, in that book it talks about a little island of people who live the longest and what causes them to live the longest. And what the research shows is that it's about the social relationships that they have with their communities, with their friends and their families. Those social relationships actually cause them to live longer. And so I'd highly recommend you read that book because it has some really interesting pieces about how important social relationships are to our health and to our well-being, to our mental capacities, and everything else involved in our lives. So first and foremost, we want to acknowledge the importance of social relationships. But next, we want to transition and understand that the change in social relationships coming from I'm moving out of the workplace into the home life, where I'm losing those relationships for my children at school, for myself at work, the things that I do each day. And then later, soon here, we'll be transitioning back to the workplace and we'll be losing our family relationships, those close-knit pieces that we've had the time to spend. And so there's three very important things here about change we want to address. The first is very simple, and I'm going to share this image because I think it speaks perfectly to this concept, and it is that change is the only constant. Recognizing and admitting that change is the only constant thing. We're constantly going through change, even within our own bodies, as we age, as well as all of our relationships. And so knowing that these social relationships are going to consistently go through change, and learning to adapt and overcome that change is what's going to lead you to have those stronger social relationships that you desire. The second one is always interesting to me because we share it, but it's actually one of the harder ones to really recognize, and that's to come to peace with the fact that you can only control yourself. You can only control yourself. And so when there is change going on, we can't control this outside world. So in the midst of this pandemic, we can't control the pandemic. We can't control that our workplaces are closing down, that people are being laid off, furloughed, etc. But what we can control, we shall. And so come to peace with that. We can only control us. We can only control our side of social relationships. If we reach out and someone doesn't reach back, that's okay. We've done our part. We can control ourselves. And the last one about change as we experience and go through this is we need to celebrate our positives. As we are at home working, celebrate the positives with our family, our loved ones, with our experiences, with our spring cleaning we've gotten to do, etc. And on the flip side, when we move back to the work life, when we lose a little bit of our relationships with our families, how do we celebrate the positives then? How do we remember that we got all this wonderful time together where we got to grow in our relationships, and also be positive and thankful about being back at work, finding those new relationships again, and also just getting back to normality for our lives, for our economy, for our world, for our relationships. So it's very simple when it comes to change. Number one, recognize that change is constant. In these social relationships, change is constant. If you look at life as a progression, we all go through different social relationships from children school age, right, and their school classmates, through college, and then as you transition out of college into the work life, and then you start to become friends with the people in your work, and then you start to become friends with your children's parents, and so on and so forth. And so what really happens is there's change is constant. So number two, we have to come to peace with that and really understand that we can only control ourselves, the way that we approach our social relationships, ourselves and others. And lastly, most importantly, celebrate those positives. Celebrate the good social relationships that you have, even ones that may be lost. Look at the positives. See why have we moved forward? What am I looking for next? And how can we continue to build ourselves and our relationships with others? So as we transition here, what we're really going to focus on is what are some ways to really build our social relationships? Because if we're saying they're so important, if the book Outliers says, hey, you're going to live longer if you have good, healthy, positive social relationships with family, with loved ones, with friends, with coworkers, then we're going to want to know how to work on those. That's very simple here. We're going to start with just 3 very easy principles, techniques, tips for working on those social relationships. First and foremost is stay connected. And this is very interesting, but we really do have to give ourselves permission to reach out to people. Give yourself permission to be the one to connect with someone. Too often we look at a situation, we always think, well, the other person should be the one this time. I talked to them last time. But releasing some of that back and forth and just being, no, I'm giving myself permission to stay connected with my friends, with my loved ones. During this COVID-19 pandemic, staying connected is more important than ever. And a lot of ways we've been doing that is through things like Zoom, right? Video conferencing, FaceTime, any way to actually see each other. If it's maybe a grandparent or a parent that's a little bit older, just picking up the phone. Go old fashioned, right? Pick up the phone and just talk to them. It means something more than anything. My fiance's grandmother lives in another state and doesn't have any of the technology, just the phone. And yes, it does maybe take us 30 minutes when we actually get on the phone with her. But the joy, the energy, that social relationship of spending the time is well worth it, right? And so maybe you even go more old-fashioned. We sit down, we write a letter to somebody. During this time, just remember that it means a lot to people. And so as we move out of this pandemic time, it may be that you take the time to go to lunch with someone. You may take the time to go to dinner. Maybe invite them over to cook dinner. But remember, how do we keep ourselves involved, connected with these social relationships? One thing I always say that's actually very important is to manage your social media. So we've come to a world where there's a fine line between social media relationships and real social relationships. And so all we want you to understand is how to just simply be aware and manage that social media relationship. Manage it so that how are we able to stay connected, because those apps are a great way to stay connected with others, share pictures, message each other back and forth, see what's going on in others' lives. But nothing truly transcends the social relationships of being together, to communicating, to talking, to spending time in the same room, which I know we cannot do right now, but spending time in the same room with people. You know, that Outliers book, that island that lives the longest, the people to community, they don't use that kind of technology. They go to a common community space, to parks, and they spend time together in dinners together. And as you looked at the book and the research, it's all about social relationships. It's actually about getting together. And so when it comes to staying connected, give yourself the permission you need to be the one to reach out, to connect, to engage, to spend time with people, and know that it's okay. Stay connected. And when you're stuck at home, when you have grandparents, when you have family that live out of town, stay connected. Find a way, because it's so important to spend that time with people, to build those relationships. So that's first and foremost, stay connected. The second one is to actually prioritize relationships. And a lot of times for people, what this really looks like is you actually have to schedule time. And that seems so weird because it's like, no, I just kind of like go out and we go get a drink, or we go get lunch real quick every once in a while. But to actually schedule time where you're going to reach out and you're going to say, hey, once a month, do you want to go do this? Should we do this? Should we talk on the phone? Actually scheduling some time to just spend together. Right now, during this environment and this pandemic, you know, for a more extended family who hasn't gotten together for a few months, what we've done is we've just kind of every other week, I believe, on Sunday at 7:00, we just say, hey, we're going to open up one of these Zoom calls and everybody jump on who's available. And I get to see some of my cousins, I get to see my grandparents, my parents, people that we don't usually see. And so how do we do that? We schedule it. I actually put it on my calendar, make sure that I don't schedule something else, make sure that I actually take the time for it. For my fiance's grandmother, every Thursday, it's somebody in the family writes her a letter, writes out, sits down, spends time, puts a few pictures in it, and sends it out. It's actually prioritizing the relationships. And one part that I have that's very important is prioritize both for yourself and for others. Prioritize yourself, and then prioritize others. And lastly, make sure you're giving your time. That's when you prioritize relationships, when you actually give your time. You know, when somebody's going through something difficult, taking the time to sit down, to listen to them, it's more valuable than you know. And so give your time freely. And as that too was, prioritize your relationships. It's so important. And the last piece here, the last tip, is to demonstrate compassion. You know, compassion is so powerful. And so actually demonstrating that, being there for somebody, and knowing that compassion is different than empathy. Empathy is the stepping in someone's shoes, taking on their pain, their hurt, and it's very draining to us. But compassion is where we come to an understanding with them. We listen fully to them. We're there to support them, but we don't take on hurt and pain. We experience it with them by understanding, by sharing, by allowing them an open space. And demonstrating compassion is so powerful, so strong. And it reminds me of this quote, and that's why I want to share this with you right here. And it says, people will forgive. Let me start over. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel. How you made them feel. By demonstrating compassion, what we do is we provide people that feeling, that ability that they know that they were heard, they were listened to, they were empowered, they were cared for. Compassion is powerful. And so being there for another person, demonstrating that compassion is super powerful. And that's how we prioritize our relationships, is demonstrate compassion when someone needs us. So again, for the relationships, it's first and foremost about staying connected. Second, it's about really prioritizing our relationships, potentially scheduling out that time, giving our time. And lastly, it's about demonstrating compassion. Really, truly being there, understanding, and having someone be really heard and empowered. It's the power of those social relationships. They're so very important. When you go, because I know walking away from today, you're going to go find that Outliers book at your library or online. You're going to buy it at Barnes & Noble. And when you read that book, I want you to think about, how am I living out my social relationships? If, by the research, is correct, which I assume it is, the power, the importance of these social relationships on our health, our mental capacity, our well-being is so vitally important. So how are you prioritizing, staying connected, demonstrating compassion with your social relationships? Thank you.